come to the final discussion, final conversation in this program. We will have a conversation about the main issues, the main topics we had over these 3 days, but also some things that might have been spoken about but weren't. And I would like to invite to come to this stage I don't see all the participants in the hall. Okay, but I will start slowly inviting Vitaliy Chernetsky, professor of Slavic studies from Kansas University, Lazar, curator, Łódź Museum, and Misho Antadze, filmmaker and an artist from Tbilisi. So I don't know if it's the easiest or the most difficult part of this whole conversation, but we will try to wrap up everything that was happening in the previous 3 days. And my first question would be obvious and simple. What are the takeaways of this conversation we had? What are the things that you can bring with you and introduce and continue working with in your practices, in individual artistic practice, in your institutional work, in your academic work, in your understanding of things? And who wants to start?
All right, I'll try. Thank you so much, Tetyana, for bringing us together. And I think my main takeaway is how important it is to have meetings like this and have this exchange of ideas, and also the balance that we had between people who do theoretical work, practicing artists, people who straddle this through institutional work. So, first of all, how good the events like this are. This is my main takeaway, because this is something that we have been hungry for, especially during pandemic times. And of course, the precarity now because of the war is a very different kind than during the pandemic. But that it makes it still possible to do this, I think, is really wonderful. And what I also, I guess, a big takeaway for me is how much great effort, how much insightful thinking and doing is happening in the Ukrainian art world, and people who support it, and people through engagement of many different kinds, but that the world still needs to do what its thing, the active listening, the discovery. This is something that we have emphasized over and over again, to make sure that there isn't that snowy blanket like on the map that Katerina had in very aptly illustrating. And this is a gap. Actually, also the important thing is allyship, because the solidarity and allyship and deep coalitions, which is different variations of that statement that we heard over the course of these 3 days, and I think that is hugely important. And we will continue pushing, we will continue hammering at the rock, as Franco told us in his poem, and neither heat nor cold is going to stop us, nor the more fierce things. But yes, it is a difficult task, but we are doing it. So I guess that may sound general, but I think that this event left me inspired, and I think it's a very good thing.
I cannot agree more with Vitaliy Chernetsky with prizing this great idea of meeting and talking about the practices of decolonization in our everyday life, in our institutions and in our thoughts. Thank you once more for the invitation and for this amazing atmosphere. Right now I'm in the moment when our conversation was so deep, so intensive that still I'm not sure what was the part of the public program and what was the part of our conversation over the table. Which gave also a lot of inspiration because actually what we did, we were continuing all the debates in the space of our community that appeared during this situation. So I really do believe that it is also a very important tool to meet and to talk and to create a safe space when we can develop our thoughts. I have many inspiration from this conference. What to choose among 50? First of all, I think that I should go back to the institution from which I came to this conference, to the Museum Sztuki in Łódź. We were all very struck by the war. And there was many initiatives on different levels how to support Ukraine, starting from the private initiatives, sharing the space, sharing the food, then trying to redirect the institution to find new spaces where we can cooperate with Ukraine. One of them was getting the stipends for Ukrainian researchers, and we fight for the stipends. We fight with Deputy Director of Muzeum Sztuki in Łódź, Maja Wójcik, and we won 3 stipends, but we could get only 1. For the Katia Badianova from Method Fund. She will stay with us till December, and her practice is very important. Also, we are working on the colonial readings called Aftertext. It's Method Fund idea. We are meeting every 2 weeks, and we are discussing with Ukrainian and international community different texts and tasks. Which was also important element for me to come to this conference and to hear what you are saying, because those perspectives are similar but very different. Then we tried to make courses for Ukrainian refugees in the Muzeum Sztuki of Łódź, but it collapsed after a few months because of the lack of the finances. Then one of the exhibition was redirected from Russo-centric to more Ukraine-centric. It happened. I still have many questions to this exhibition, but I'm very happy that there will be a lot of important Ukrainian artists. Not to make short story longer than it needs, I just thought about what kind of practices could appear in our institution. And I believe that talks, conversations are one of the most important tasks, and also including Ukrainian artists, Ukrainian theoreticians to our practice. The general thoughts which were very important from this conference was that we are living in injustice world. This is true. And these injustices are very wild. They are visible on many levels, and they are inevitable, maybe. And what had happened, we have the huge game changer, which is a war, a Russian aggression against Ukraine. And Ukraine, although this is a very difficult situation, could really somehow win the situation on the global level. Ukrainian discourse is very interesting, attractive, super important. It brings not only Ukrainian questions to the center of the debate, but also the questions connected with other subordinated tribes and nations in that part of the world. And I think that it's super important also in this field of research, which is made by Vitaliy and many other colleagues, that Eastern Europe is rather invisible in the Anglo-Saxonian and German theoretical field. And French, of course. Why? and Arabic and Chinese. Yeah, like there are many fields where we can be, like Ukraine can be more visible. But what is really important that this is the moment when this discourse is really strong and attractive, and many theoreticians are like coming to this discourse, trying to ask to their everyday practice questions which are appearing from Ukraine, and I really like it. I like also this idea that the colonial jargon can be hijacked by the empire to its own purposes. We are sure that the narration are very easy to be stolen and transferred. There are many, many, many examples how the topos that was connected with the independency, egalitarian ideas were transferred in something completely different. The more discourse is strong, the harder the work for the hijackers is. And I think Ukraine is really like great in this fight. Another thing, war is tragic but not unique. So alliances are very important, and it happens. And third moment, which I would like to stress, that was important for me, I never thought about before. It was in Katerina Botanova, one of the reflection. Today lecture was really amazing, but yesterday she also gave a very fruitful thought. So it was idea that I also heard from Oksana Barszynova, Deputy Director of National Museum in Ukraine, that after the annexation of Crimea, the contacts with Russian museums, with Russian institutions stopped. One of the ideas was to create a special Eastern European post-Soviet ICOM organization. Moscow would be the center, and the other countries could like join to this ICOM organization and be well represented because there is a common field. So culture is a weapon. And understanding this is super important. But what was really interesting, that 8 years ago, more than 8 years ago, when the war has started, this contact stopped. And it was like violent stop, but made by the people on this individual civic level as a conscious decision. And after this ceased, after this stopped, new field appeared. That means that it is possible to create a new space, new questions, even with the even in the violent situation. That it is sometimes very fruitful. And a few years went by, and then we have a question: what was this imperial language needed for? If we have so many questions, we can address the otherwise. The last thing I wanted to say is also about necessity of building individual language, not depicting narration that are created for other cultural spaces. It is like a disease of not only post-Soviet countries. Maybe post-Soviet is not a proper word right now because we have like many much more important identification that post-Soviet. That this like copying the discourses is a bad habit. Of course, it's good to read and to understand what is going on in global context, but still working on their own languages and asking their own questions. And I think that contemporary Ukrainian art artists are doing this in a great way, and I have many examples, and I am still fascinated with this amazing field that really creates new questions, addresses new problems. And with the space of this culture is also very brave, showing the difficult moment connected with, let's say, past that is not only the victim and oppressor, but sometimes those two roles are bind together.
I think that most important question that you posed is, what did we learn? And it's not a question that has an easy answer. I'm sure everyone has kind of a different answer to it, but yesterday when we were talking, I was somehow I'm stuck with the same text of Benjamin that keeps coming back to my mind about history. Today I was thinking about the fact that what appears to the rest of the world and what appears to the Western world, especially right now, that this is a state of exception, has always been the state of exception for us that have struggled to survive against the Russian Empire, and that the rest of the world and we ourselves have to recognize that this state of exception will not end with the war, and it did not begin with the full-scale invasion. It did not begin with 2014. It began way back, and I think we need to be thinking of that time and regaining that time that we have been robbed of. I think of, from the previous lecture, I think of all the artists who are still working now in Ukraine, and the kind of the time that has been stolen from them to be creating artwork that doesn't necessarily engage with the full-scale invasion, but is free to explore other things. And I think in yesterday's discussion we were talking about how important it is to imagine when we were speaking about decolonization, and we mentioned that you know it's not an end goal, it's a process, and to go through with this process we need to imagine this kind of decolonized condition. I think conferences like this and engagement between individual artists and individual cultural thinkers like this creates a possibility to exercise that imagination, and that was the main takeaway for me, that work does not begin or end now, and we have to think about how, because the work has been going on, it just needs to be made visible. And it's unfortunate, again, we keep coming back to this, it's unfortunate that it took a war for this work to become visible, but we need to seize this moment and share a knowledge. You know, I mean, I think on a lot of ways it's not us who need to do the work, but it's the rest of the world that needs to see the work that is being done.
Your words just reminded me about a conversation I had several months ago with a friend of mine, who is also my neighbor, and he is director of the Little Academy of Science in Ukraine, which is also a post-Soviet kind of creation, but it allows many young people to get acquainted with the academia, with scientific work, and which has been reformed quite intensely in the last years, and is a very interesting actually organization that opened a science museum in Ukraine, a very famous place now. And his name is Lisovy, and he had many dreams. We were talking about a museum of art in Ukraine, and he had many projects with his partners overseas in the United States and in Europe. And when the invasion began, he first joined the territorial defense of our region, so he was basically protecting my home. And I was texting him every morning asking, like, okay, so when are the Russian tanks coming? Like, just let me know if my house is there or not. And he was saying me every time, like, okay, it's not today, maybe tomorrow, but not today, definitely. And at some point he wrote that there will be no more danger around our place, and that he's going to the front. And he went to the front line, and now every week he goes to the 0 point, as they call it. So the 0 point is the front line, and he's serving in this part of the army that we're not supposed to talk about. And it's very dangerous. And every time he comes out, he writes how many people he lost. And every time I take my breath and I wait until he returns and he answers my message and says he's returned. And this is what also you told right now, that people are not doing an art complete in their dreams. They're not doing what they plan to do. And when I ask him all the time, Oksana, you have to be really careful, please, you know, you have so many things to do when you return. He said that it will be a privilege for me to die in this war if I do, because our people, Ukrainians, they've been waiting for this for 300 years to fight this war. And it's our privilege to fight this war and win in this war. I wasn't planning to speak about this, but I just remembered this conversation, and it felt important to just remember this person and to speak about his story. And I think for myself, the main takeaway from these 3 days of conversation is the normality versus emergency. That is, I think, the state of the world right now, because we kind of all understand the international system of security failed. It doesn't exist anymore. No one is secure. We kind of understand that the international law has failed because, you know, it can be manipulated in all different ways, and just no one is able to do anything about it. We kind of understand that the economical system is ruined, yeah, and we know that it's the European money that support Russian economy these days that is allowing them to produce more and more weapons to kill Ukrainians. But at the same time, we see the attempts at the West to kind of bring things down and kind of take it normal, yeah. But I think it doesn't work. You cannot, you know, we have seen the elephant already taking all the room in all the senses. And the work we just saw from the Biennale and Aleftina's image, I mean, this elephant is there. We're not able to hide him anymore. And my question to all of you is there any power that art has that can do something about this collapse of the world?
I am not sure I have a ready answer, but I think that art has power to wake up and stand and notice. And I just, I mean, in other moments too, for one of the responses to Ukraine fighting so bravely in this war that was sort of organized with a lot of creativity and that came possible was bringing the poet Luba Yakimchuk to the Grammy Awards. And her performance really woke people up in many ways. So the appearance of a poet, and a poet who is not a sort of a commercial sort of bestseller star, but somebody who can just speak and break through. And it made me think, however, of another poem by her. It's not the one that she performed at the Grammys, The Prayer, but I Have a Crisis for You, Mene do Tebe Kriza. And this, Ukrainians have been very rightly criticizing global responses that highlighted the word crisis, you know, using it euphemistically to describe the war. And Luba's poetry, Luba's poem that just savages it, you know, a very powerful rejoinder. And that we've seen many rejoinders like this in the work of Aleftina Kahidze, in the work of other poets. I'm thinking of Helena Kruk and her poem "Ты стоишь с плакатиком нет войне." So criticizing the inadequate response of Russian to cultural practitioners to the situation. But yes, the waking up, the piercing through, that showing that crisis is, but there's a crisis in global crisis of caring and understanding, and crisis of a failure of imagination for what the dangerous things that are possible, but also of futures. So we are breaking through those failures, and this is what I was trying to say, that Ukrainian society, Ukrainian people, but as we have seen very powerfully, Ukrainian artists are leading us into imagining a better, more powerful future. So this is where I think we have this utopian but very practical, also very necessary role. And I think, yes, in that sense, art can save the world by work of artists like the Ukrainian artists today, who are helping us envision, imagine a future.
I think it's kind of a question that has a short answer and a long answer, and maybe the short answer is no, and the longer answer is that the longer answer is no, but and the longer answer is I think that the question itself kind of becomes a reason for a practice, and I've seen all kinds of artists around me have very different responses to the war. Again, I bring up my friend Yulia, who was completing her master's and converted the artist studio that was provided to her by the academy where she was studying to a humanitarian point for refugees coming to the Netherlands, and has done incredible work and organized a daycare, and etc. And I think that's one way to go about it. I mean, like, who's to say that that's not an artistic practice and that's not an artistic statement? And when the full-scale invasion broke out, I kind of suspended my own practice because I couldn't really do much else. I was, volunteering, etc., doing the things that seemed urgent. But then, at a certain point, you realize that thinking is also urgent, and being visible is also urgent, because we as Georgians in 2008, we weren't afforded, because we're a bit more to the east, slightly further from Europe. I think the West was still really flirting with Putin, as disgusting as that was, and had this appeasement policy. So the visibility didn't last for long, and we still kind of remained this obscure region, and we still lived the consequences of having been invisible and just kind of like misunderstood. Definitely, I don't think whatever we are in the Western imagination, like cultural producers, is not what the West imagines us to be. But being, for example, with colleagues from Ukraine and from former Russian imperial subjects, that's something that we can recognize with each other, that we have a full-fledged life that's not confined to these kind of mediatic cliches of war and violence and places of war and places of violence and landscapes that don't actually have to do that much with how we imagine ourselves to be and how we know each other to be like, and we have to make that visible, and it's difficult to make that visible in these conditions, because I mean, one of the Paul Lafargue, I think, no, not Paul Lafargue, but what in War and Cinema, who wrote War and Cinema? You would know. War and Cinema, the book. A French phenomenologist. Virilio, yeah. In War and Cinema, Paul Virilio actually recognizes that one of the purposes of war is to create a spectacle. And this is what's happening, a spectacle of violence with really real, biological consequences of death is created. But we have to, through our work, show our existence beyond that spectacle. And, I don't use the word spectacle to diminish what it is, but it inflicts fear, and it inflicts helplessness, and as artists from these regions, I don't say region on purpose, there's many, as artists in these regions, it is now our duty not to succumb to the spectacle and stand our ground.
Very difficult question you asked, Tanya. There are no easy questions. Many thoughts came to my mind, starting from the conversation with Sergei Zhadan 4 years ago, when he was asked very similar question, can literature be a powerful weapon during the war? And he said, literature? Take a look. People are killed by bullets. Word cannot protect a human body from the bullet. But when we observe his activity, which is one of the many activities of Ukrainian cultural workers and artists, we see that still those spaces which are created by culture are very important tool in this war, because they can collect money, then they can collect people, and they can produce kind of like mental shelter for the people in this crisis. I thought that art is kind of complicated emanation of society. That there are no easy paths. They are linking artists with the society, but they are. They are multi-layered, they are in the shadow, they are visible. And we have like many outcomes going from art to the society, back and forth. And Ukrainian art, as I really like to repeat, was and is very close to the society. But still, art is not propaganda. And this is completely different approach, because propaganda wants to have a very easy outcome. You should be convinced to something. Of course, sometimes art also uses that kind of tool and has its motivation. But still, contemporary Ukrainian art brings common values into the consideration, and I think it's a very important aspect of this situation. If we thought that art will build utopia, we are going back to social realismus that wanted to show the better world than it is now, or to the avant-garde. But all of these ideas about art brought violence with them. And these are not the answers for today's words. When Katerina reminded the Ukrainian pavilion with the open group, I thought that really there was kind of values that are visible in Ukrainian society and culture. Artists decided that there will be no representation, they will invite everyone who wants to join. And actually it was 3 years ago, but now we can see that people are acting like this, that they are on the horizontal, with the horizontal binds. They communicate not only through the hierarchy, but in a more egalitarian way. And this art, which was not like a propaganda tool, show that kind of processes, plus taking into the consideration the biggest Ukrainian plane, Mria, which is now distracted by Russian missiles, but still was the background for the Ukrainian wife president Zelensky, Olena Zelenska, who took a photo in front of the Mria. So there are memes that are circulating. I believe that art has a power, but it's not easy power, and I like the Ukrainian context that is so deep and that it's so developed, and it's like open also for difficult questions and answers that are not satisfying.
One thing to mention, of course, here, and this is actually where Anna's mention of the Vogue photo of Olena Zelenska with Maria in the background was, it's the question of has the message been heard, how it is heard, where the meaning is created in the dialogue. Because I know of many people in the West who did not realize that this was Maria, that this was a very specific thing. They completely misread the symbol and actually criticized Olena Zelenska for posing in front of an airplane which used to carry passengers, and they just preposterous outrage for them not actually trying to understand what was being said. But this is something that pushes me to recognize this common danger that we have seen, that the misinterpreting, the discounting, the easy dismissal that Katarina mentioned is that that you are all sort of doing your petty ethno-nationalisms and do not belong in the grown-up club of progressive unified Europe. Yes, and these facile labeling, stereotyping, reducing, eliminating difference, this homogenizing kind of thing, those are discourses have been going on very, very dangerously. So this intervention in that we are doing, so intervention in the sense of a critical intellectual intervention, which of course now when you use this word, I mean, it is not easy to use it metaphorically anymore, but the way we are practicing, the way we are with our practice asking challenging questions and demanding to be heard, and this is a very important gesture that finally is being noticed. And this is something that Ukrainian cultural practitioners have reflected on for a long time, sort of the challenge of how to be noticed and recognized and afforded recognition as somebody who has ideas and thoughts and messages that the world should hear. This has been the huge challenge, and this is what we see, that it took this horrible war for the listening actually to start. So the tragedy, horrible tragedy in that sense, led to the world doing something right. And then I guess one of the takeaways will have to be that the world should remember that it is Ukraine and Ukrainian soldiers fighting at the front line, Ukrainian civil society mobilizing, the Ukrainian artists giving us the thoughts through their images that is right now enabling, guaranteeing a future for this world precisely through their imagination, and the world needs to hear this and to recognize and to make conclusions out of that that should be different from the older, easier, stereotypical reflections that it made.
I think to add to this, one of the thoughts that I had now, it's kind of this question, especially when you practice film, there's always this question of, or any kind of more ephemeral medium that can't really be held, to whom does your work belong, and there's no easy answers, but one way to think about it is that half of it belongs to the artist and the other half belongs to the audience, right?
And art as commodity.
And yeah, but if we don't speak about it as kind of commodity, but really as an idea that you create, maybe the answer to the question of like, can art save the collapsed world? The answer of that lies with those who receive it, and those who show it, those who display it, a bit more so than those who make it. Because the instruments to change the world and reimagine the world are there.
And everyone is an artist.
Art is also a glue for the community. But our world is changing, and the representation in the world is changing. So this creating commons is one of the very important factors that art does right now. But soon it might have different tasks to realize, not only to ask questions, not only to build the future, not only to build community, but something else we cannot know right now. It is so amazing space that we can never predict where it will appear and when it will find their emanation. Yes, I have like a few thoughts in the same time, and it's hard to catch one. But maybe, Misho, I could ask you about your film, which was really amazing. And sorry if you allowed me.
It's okay, sure.
When because I am your audience. When I saw this film for the first time, it was like a crocodile that was catch in it was found footage made of films with the crocodiles as the main hero, taken from Soviet and also German archives.
And YouTube and
YouTube and BBC.
Anywhere I could
anywhere.
Yeah.
But you catch this crocodile figure as a stranger, like an alien. And in the very beginning, I thought, okay, so this might be like the representation of imperial discourse, yeah? You have someone who is exotic or who is from abroad, and you domesticate this animal and show it in prison to prove how powerful you are. But today in the morning, I thought, or maybe it's about the empire. And I wanted to ask you, why crocodile? Why this classical exotic figure became the center of your story? your Georgian artist. I will not mention anything about the crocodile that was in the cave in the beginning of the war on the corner of Chreszczatek and Chmelnytsky, and who died with the first bomb dropped into the into Kiev in 1941.
One thing about the film is that it's very fictionalized, but it's not fictional. The Saturn existed. It was a real alligator, born in the U.S., then sold to Germany, Nazi Germany, then escaped from the zoo, then captured by British soldiers, then given to the Soviet Union, where and died in Russia like 2 years back, and it's why to me as a Georgian, the affinity that I felt with the alligator is that sometimes you feel like a captive of history, and you can't escape it, and for an alligator to be a captive of history is somehow even more tragic, because what does it have to do with anything? And there's much more to expand. I mean, like, it was really subjected to all kinds of humiliations, because when he was first given to the Moscow Zoo, because he came from Germany, they named him Hitler the alligator before they named him Saturn the alligator, which is humiliating. And that's one of the things that empires do. They humiliate their subjects in ways that sometimes the subjects might not even be aware of.
It was a wonderful piece. Thank you for this film.
Thank you.
I'm really inspired on how this conversation is going circles and it's not ending, and I hope it will not be ending. And I just want the others also to join. So I ran out of questions. I just want to give the microphone and give the word to everyone. So please, can we also have a bit light to the audience? And yeah, so let's just all have equal access to microphone.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for this marvelous days. I was not present to all of it, but it was very fruitful and very inspiring. And just few points and questions. First, my first association with the alligator, I was not thinking of it before, but I kept thinking. It very much reminds me of Pietro Longo's famous Venetian painting of a rhinoceros, if you're present, being captivated by Venetian Empire, and all these Venetian ladies in masks looking at it, and this really wild. You can see it in the National Gallery in London, but there is also a replica here in the Korea Museum, I think, of this Pietro Longo's painting, and it's also wild, absolutely exotic animal, and people looking at it and the way the animal, and you don't feel the thing that I felt very admirable in this, how the Ukrainian art responded to the invasion, and I've been following Ukrainian pavilions since I live in Venice. It's been 18 years now. There's no self-victimization. There's no self-objectivization. It's a very I-you, and I remembered Martin Buber, and I think that's the main, probably that will be the answer of the art. It's not them anymore, it's not he, it's not ich, es, ich, du, though and I. So this terrible wound made by this war in the flesh and the perception, the consciousness of Europe right now made this dialogue happen in a terrible and tragic way, but the art is the first to speak in the direct I and thou, not I and him. And that's what I would like to thank all of you for. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you for this discussion. It was very also thought-provoking and inspiring, as seems to be all the discussions that we have here. But I was thinking, we're talking about the futures and about the power of art to imagine the futures. We're here again, in Venice, at Venice Biennale. And if we imagine that we meet here in 2 years, how would you imagine the future of Venice Biennale in the context of what we're talking? To be decolonizing itself, to be maybe addressing the more issues that we discussed on this stage. What is this imaginable Venice Biennale in 2 years for you?
Let me begin with answering this, because what I will do shortly before I say goodbye is I will introduce the further topics of this program, and actually the program is ending with the conversation about the coloniality of the biennials. And I really hope that we will have Cecilia Alemani and someone else from the Venice Biennial here answering these particular questions, actually. But I think, at least from seeing the responses of the major shows, the Biennial, the Venice Biennial, Documenta, Manifesta, the Berlin Biennial, at least those that I have seen and I have witnessed myself in the past month, I think it will be reconsidered as actually the shape of representation, the medium of representation of art. And maybe some of these biennials will just not be there anymore in 2 or 4 years or 5 years, because they were just not able to decolonize themselves, to adjust, to become flexible in their reaction to the world, in their response to the situation in the world. And if those biennials are part of this part of this normal universal Western point of view on everything, they will just not be able to fit in the new world that is now imagined in Ukraine for the rest of the world.
Maybe one thing to add is just a very simple statement that came here yesterday. Nothing about us without us. And it's either that or disappear.
Biennale was invented around 100 years ago as a representation of nations, newly created then. And it was the answer for 19th century questions. What are the questions of 21st century? What are the questions of the world, of our part of the world after 24th February 2022? And after taking into the consideration many massacres that are happening right now in the world, can Biennale somehow answer to these core questions connected to the body, health, climatical crisis? Can art do this? Will Biennale be in 2 years? I don't know. But I would like to see a change that goes from self-reflection, self-colonization, because I do believe that we should start from ourselves asking these questions, that it's not only the other that should answer us to these questions. So Biennale will be just adaptable to the world as we are. So the Biennale is in our hand. It depends on us how it looks like. And I think we should have dialogue about this, dreams and dialogues.
Just short one sentence, and maybe finally, at least once in 100's history, and a person from our part of the world will be able to curate the Biennale, you know, and change it. Who knows?
So many wonderful things have been said. I just kept on nodding and agreeing and saying, yes, yes, absolutely. Those are the changes that we need to see happen. So the addressing those structural epistemic injustices and yes, a radical reformatting because of thinking and listening and reflection. That is what is necessary, and also, yes, the broader addressing the broader challenges of the world, you know, in the conditions of the Anthropocene and, you know, human impact on our planet, because we are in a city that is right now very precarious in the global climate crisis. So that is also one other thing, you know, we hope that the global climate crisis will not in 2 years lead to this being impossible.
Our friend Angela Vitaliy from Venice asked yesterday the question about the legacy of the Soviet Union, and she said that us, majority of the world, see this situation like this. So my dream is that this us is much bigger. Will be much bigger.
It's sort of a closing word already, so it's hard now to get back to a very cynical part. I'm sorry to mention that, but in Zurich there is a museum collection now being built with public money, and a private collection of a guy who made a fortune with weapon dealing in the Second World War and later. And we know from other art institutions based heavily upon the money given from billionaires who made their money with weapons again. So if there is a next issue which art could address, and maybe the engagement of Ukrainian artists on the front, or opening up their ateliers and studios for humanitarian support, maybe we'll bring back an engagement for art which actually can change those kinds of structures in society, which allows a few people to be insanely rich, which with the production of the means of destroying. And we talk here about very positive signs, and I do agree, but then there is another elephant which is sort of rather bigger.
But are you sure that this is a task for art?
Well, the engagement, maybe how can art be decolonized through the war is that maybe art starting to make more sense again without making it to an instrument itself, but making more sense, and that can maybe address this kind of stuff, and wake-up calls can being done. But art will not change this, of course, but at least we should know where the money comes from often, even if it allows us to speak in this protected sphere on their colleagues about actually erasing this kind of structures. At the end, it is still those money which are allowing us to be here in the bubble.
And I think this is the perfect moment to say that the next event that will happen on the 8th, 9th and 10th of October here will be dedicated to art and war in this sense, on how art and weapon are connected. So we will be speaking about weaponizing art, using art as a weapon, but also art as a target in the war, and also connections between producing weapons and collecting art, and also artists being at the front line and fighting with the weapons instead of pencils, cameras, etc. So we will, that's a huge topic, of course, and thank you for bringing it up here and raising this question, and I'm sure it needs much more time and profound discussion, which is, I think, crucial in this conversation about decolonizing art. So we'll definitely have this happening in the in the early October, yeah, more profoundly.
Thank you. This is such an interesting question and an interesting topic for the final discussion of this conference. I think while Jadon is right that art cannot stop bullets, art and literature is also where we create meaning out of the chaos and pain of life. And I think in that way it is just as important and crucial as body armor to living through some of these events. But I wanted to ask a more practical question. We've talked a lot about response and the way the world has responded and hasn't responded to this crisis. And we're living in a moment where, in addition to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we're seeing the rise of fascism around the world in places like Brazil, Turkey, other countries in Eastern Europe like Hungary. And what I wanted to ask is, if you could imagine the institutions that show and disseminate and publicize art at their most just, effective, engaged, decolonized, if you will, what does that look like? What is your most fond imagining of an institution that is doing its job?
My first thought that it doesn't exist yet, but we have to create it.
I really, you know, I mean, I don't think about institutions all that much. I kind of like exist outside of this institutional world, except film festivals, right? And they take a lot of money. They take place in terrible places. But, you know, I mean, one thing that we see right now and that we saw after the full-scale invasion is how artists have an innate moral compass and know with whom to work and with whom not to work. You know, and how especially, you know, I mean, it's such a huge gap between the artists that I know from Eastern Europe, for example, who know not to ever work with the Russian institution again, and those who did before withdrew their works, apologized, moved on. We just have to adopt the same kind of attitude, not only in moments of, in states of exception, but recognize that we're always in a state of exception.
Thank you for this question, Alex. I would like to combine it somehow with the questions of Jurian. I believe that art was addressed as a space where things can be thought differently, that new structures can appear. When I think about the institution, I also do understand that the institution has its bureaucracy and its procedures that are invented to last long. But thinking about the world that has so many new crises, I do understand that the old structures cannot respond for this. And one of the most beautiful responses I saw in my life was the structure of Maidan, which was anti-hierarchical, which was egalitarian, which was based on the free will and the common thoughts, sharing the responsibility, taking the responsibility, changing, and very plastic. Is it possible to be institutionalized? I don't know, but maybe we can think in that direction, in the direction of inclusion, of dialogue and horizontal bounds, and self-responsibility, not giving the responsibility to someone else.
Thank you, Anna, for bringing this. I also have been thinking a lot about this image and, you know, about Maidan as a something as in that coming community, sort of the Agamben's sort of idea of potential future communities that arise. The challenge is the rest of the world's response, because that kind of community and those kind of imagined and then attempted to put into practice new things very often elicit violent response. The violent response that we saw with the death of the Nebesna Sotnya, the Heavenly Hundred as they're called in Ukraine, and the war. But also early on the Chinese government's reaction to Tiananmen Square, which was one of the first those kind of things that was seen, and that was precisely what Agamben is talking. So how do we ensure that there is a happy velvet revolution, Prague style, and not a Tiananmen Square future? This is an open question. This really is an open question. The world needs to prove, and things hang in the balance. We really are at this point. Curve could go either way.
Yeah, but Ukrainian Maidan was successful structure. And of course, it might not be petrified. Maybe, just some element of this experience would be interesting. It's also based on the energy of the people who are creating this situation, because we are usually dealing with the institutions that are depicting a previous world somehow, and its demand.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Questions, comments, remarks, wishes? No? It's the... okay. But I think it's the finale of our conversation for today and for these 3 days. And now I think we just have to thank this moment, and I would like to thank everyone who has been with us these 3 days, and first of all our amazing speakers for doing a trip here to Venice, for staying and dedicating their time and expertise and knowledge and love and solidarity with us. And I would like to thank my colleagues from the Ukrainian Institute who made it happen, and our partners, Open Place and the Ukrainian Pavilion Curatorial Group, the Naked Room Gallery, and International Renaissance Foundation. Thank you so much, the Biennale team, for hosting us in this wonderful place and streaming it online to Facebook and YouTube, and all the recordings of these 3 days, except for the screenings, will be available. So whoever wants to see the missing parts and to share it with, it's possible and very, very welcome. And as I told, we're going to continue with this conversation, and the next one will happen in October 8th through 10th, and we will speak about how art and weapons are connected. Yeah, so how, if art has any power to overcome war or stop war or do something about it, and how weapons are destroying art in all senses, from destroying cultural heritage to actually destroying the whole idea of art. So it will be another big conversation, and after that we will have the session on art history and art histories falling between the cracks, and it will be also, I'm sure, very interesting and productive conversation on how this narrative of art history is constructed and what it's missing, because it's missing a lot, as we know. And the final conversation will happen in November, and it will be dedicated to the biennials, the narratives behind them, and how do we decolonize actually this type of artistic practice. So please follow us. We have a page on Facebook dedicated to the program, and also all the institutions present here will distribute information. And if you are in Venice in October and November, just mention those dates and come to come in person and see also the screening program, which is only available for those here in Teatro Piccolo in Venice. Thank you so much. It was intriguing, insightful, inspiring, and we have a lot to take with us from it. And I would like to thank the armed forces of Ukraine for, keeping the sky over Ukraine and for allowing a privilege of having this conversation here. Slava Ukraini!